Married, divorced, and single here, it's one family that mingles here.
Conservative and liberal here, we've all got to give a little here.
Big and small here, there's room for us all here.
Doubt and belief here, we all can receive here.
LGBTQ and straight here, there is no hate here.
Woman and man here, everyone can here.
Whatever your race here, for all of us grace here.
In imitation of the ridiculous love Almighty God has for each of us and all of us, let us live in love without labels.
I try to write a regular blog, but since I started preaching, finding the time to write both blogs and sermons can get a little tough. In fact, I recently took an unintentional hiatus from blogging. I fully intended for my Lent to include a fast from beer, and that lasted not even a day. But instead, I took a fast from writing. Typically, when I do write a blog post, I think I need to scour far and wide for a topic. But 9 times out of 10, I wind up writing about mundane things. I have noticed that the thing I am overlooking is oftentimes the thing that I need to write about. The thing that is obvious is just waiting for me to pay it some attention. It could be what seems like a minor conversation or a small incident that happened that just seems a little too boring. Because to be honest, I think I'm supposed to write about all the things that are intriguing and noteworthy and click-worthy. And do you ever get a song stuck in your head, a song that maybe you haven't heard for months or even years, and once you clue in and pay attention to what the words are saying, somehow it oddly applies to the situation you're dealing with in your life at that moment? It's almost too close to see. Heather Lynn mentioned to me last week that when she's preparing her song lists for our services, the music, it makes itself known to her with little effort on her behalf. She said sometimes she pays it no mind because she assumes it shouldn't be that easy. It's almost too close to see. After the women found the tomb empty and the disciples confirmed, Jesus made a few appearances after his resurrection. And in most of these stories, his identity was invisible to the people he showed up to. They could not recognize him as Jesus, even as he walked and as he talked and as he ate with them. And when he walked with the 2 travelers on the road to Emmaus, it wasn't until he fed them that they could see him. And with Mary Magdalene, it wasn't until he said her name, Mary, that she could see him. And now today we will be covering our final resurrection story. Another time that Jesus showed up and his own people could not recognize him. Maybe in each of these scenarios he was unrecognizable because he was too close for them to see. Let's begin in John chapter 21. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, or the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going to go out and fish, you guys, Simon Peter told them, and they said, "Oh, we'll go with you." So they went out and they got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Have you ever wanted to be alone? And so you politely say, I'm going to go take a walk. And then 7 of your closest friends decide to join you? I think that's what's going on here. I suspect all of this back and forth about Jesus showing up sometimes and not showing up other times was more than Peter could take. He needed some fresh air and he needed something familiar. He needed his work. He needed a break from the sitting around, the eating, the fretting. He needed to stop running scenarios and strategies. He needed to return to his work as a fisherman. I am not a fisherman, nor am I a fisherwoman, and I am not a fisher person. Eric, he likes to fly fish, and he tried to teach me once, and the first time my line got caught up in a tree, I said no more. I have fond memories of fishing with my dad as a kid. He would pull my sister and I out of school, and we would go fishing for walleye or trout, depending on which lake he chose to putter around near Spokane, Washington. We each had these kid-sized poles with a reel that said Zebco. And I don't know why I remember that detail, probably because I spent hours staring at it, waiting. Dad would get us each set up, lining our hooks with a miniature marshmallow and a small piece of corn. Sometimes we used worms. I guess it just depended on what the fish were biting that particular day. And then that tug, tug, tug on the line, different than the sort of tug that happens when you're just snagged on something. That fluttered tugging, it would light me up, and I jerked that pull like my life depended on it. And I can't remember many times a fish got away from me. Dad would move quick across the boat after securing his own pole, net in hand. Catching a fish was exciting then, and I'm sure it would be exciting now if I gave fishing a try, but I need to find out how to drum up a little more patience. I do recognize the draw, and there's a reason why some people can spend so much time sitting and waiting, because the reward is great. And these poor guys sitting and waiting and wondering all through the night, I'm not sure they know what the reward looks like. What a strange time they were in. They didn't know if Jesus was coming or going. They didn't know what to do next, so they fished all night long in a boat, trying to get some relief from the strangeness. And after sitting through the cold, cold night, they caught nothing. The passage continues in verse 4. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" No, they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciples whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coal there with the fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, he took the bread, he gave it to them, and he did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Peter went fishing because it was the only thing he knew to do. He was desperate, and we have to remember. Peter was the one who cut the ear off of the guard in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he also denied that he was one of Jesus' disciples just prior to the crucifixion. He didn't deny just one time. He denied 3 times, and to make matters worse, Jesus predicted that he would, and he denied even that. And when we blow it, that stuff lingers. It doesn't go away. Shame settles in. Peter is carrying a really heavy weight, and it wasn't a net full of fish. As the sun starts to rise, they notice a figure standing on the shore. They're not very far out, only 100 yards. The guy yells across the water, "Any luck? Catch anything?" This seems to be a thing among people who like to fish. "Nah," they said, tired and dejected. And once again, another thing people who fish like to do, they offer advice. "What bait are you using? What flies have you tried?" Marshmallows and corn. We've been working this side of the boat, but nothing." And the guy on the shore continues, "Well, try throwing the net onto the other side." And I have to admit, I'm actually impressed they did it. They must have been really desperate. And sure enough, more fish than they could possibly fathom, 153, and the net didn't even break. A true miracle. And in that moment, on the heels of this miracle, John's eyes were opened. He proclaimed, "It is the Lord." This particular miracle was actually a repeat. They'd already heard and seen a similar miracle when Peter was called by Jesus to be his disciple. It just so happened Jesus was in a boat, in his boat, in the Sea of Galilee, not far from the shore, teaching a bunch of people. And after he was done giving the lesson, he glanced at the floor of the boat and noticed the measly catch. In Luke 5:4, Jesus says, "Put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked hard all night and we haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." And sure enough, that day, the day that Peter was called by Jesus saying, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will catch men." They caught so many fish that day, the nets broke and the boat started to sink. So Peter, he knew this story. He was there the day of his calling. He was called to abundance, and he was called with abundance. And you know that this story had been shared over and over again as they traipsed across the Galilean countryside, as they sat in synagogues and temples over meals of fish and bread and wine. It was a familiar story, and it was a good story. But today was different. Today, that initial call for Peter, it felt tired and old. He was disillusioned, losing hope by the minute. Being called by God to something can be an equally awesome and terrible experience. We talk a lot about my call to start a church here in Longmont and Boulder County, and just like Peter's call, I was sometimes overwhelmed by the thrill of the call and equally overwhelmed by the terror of the call. It isn't smooth sailing, but the beginning of the call to start this church was an exercise in abundance. I had an opportunity to reach out to Paula. We had the people at Highlands Church, and then we had Aaron, and then Heather Lynn and Jason and Kimberly decided to join us too, and Caitlin. We were couched in abundance. And despite the waiting for what felt like forever, it happened. And all of you're part of the abundance. Every week in our staff meetings, we start with, "What's good?" And your names come up every week. You are the abundance. What we do here, what is cultivated, is abundant, and it is so, so good. Peter got in the boat that night to fish, and his friends joined him, whether he wanted them or not. And now Jesus is there on the shore, and they have this problem of abundance, of way too many fish. And Peter's only response after he puts on his garment is to jump in the water. It's all he can do to go to Jesus, however he has to do that. And his buddies, they knew. They knew he was racked with frustration and disappointment and anger at himself, and they let him go. They carried the load. They hoisted the burden, and while they, I'm sure, were equally thrilled to see Jesus, they knew Peter had to go first. They made a sacrifice for him. This week, early in the week, I had to get away. There are times, I admit, when our calls can feel heavy, where maybe things don't feel as rewarding as they once did, when grief can set in or life gets in the way. Discouragement happens to everyone, and where what once was abundance can start to feel like a liability. And I had a week like that. The weight of the world, some personal incidents happened, and I was discouraged. I needed to be alone, to walk and write, and I needed to pray. And I have people who know me, who pick up my slack. I have people. I have Eric. I have friends. I have Paula and Aaron who sent me away, who made it possible, who encouraged me to go. Peter, he jumped in the water, swimming, running to Jesus because his mistakes loomed large. He failed, and this haunted him. His worth, his call, his purpose, his love, all of it was called into question, not by Jesus, but by Peter himself. He was unmoored and he was hopeless, and being near Jesus was his only answer. And something happened in Peter. Something dislodged, a shift. And Jesus knew this. Peter was now ripe for what Jesus did next. In verse 15, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" "Oh, yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Jesus isn't forgiving Peter here because Jesus doesn't need to forgive Peter. Jesus needs to restore Peter, and in restoring Peter, he also restores Peter's call. Feed my lambs, feed my sheep. Do you love me? Do you love me more than these guys? Do you love me more than your fishing? Do you love me more than your family? Feed my lambs, feed my sheep. Follow me. Peter's call, it didn't change, and in fact, the call remained the same. It was just too close for him to see. On the beach of the Sea of Galilee, where the first call happened, and now on the beach of the Sea of Galilee, Peter is recommissioned in the same call. After a load of 153 fish and after a full belly, Jesus restored Peter. Abundance countered the hopelessness. 3 times Peter denied him. 3 times he was called back. And yes, the call to lambs and sheep, to fish and to people, well, that's messy work and it's downright smelly. But Peter is called and he knows this. Our hopelessness, it lays the groundwork for abundance. It's oftentimes in the most desperate of circumstances where I experience the greatest grace. When my children were small, I would often scream so loud and so long at them that my throat would hurt. It's one of my greatest failures, and while I know it's very normal, I was humbled and I was hopeless. I didn't know that it could get better. But it was in those moments when I'd sit next to my child in great despair, holding him or her, and I'd say, "I'm so sorry. I was wrong." And my sweet child would say, "It's okay, Mommy." Give me a big hug, touch my face. This is the greatest grace, and this is what Jesus did for Peter. Jesus resurrected Peter. Rachel Held Evans said, God is in the resurrection business. And I would add that God is in the abundance business. God is abundant here, and God is abundant with us, with generous love and mercy, but sometimes I think it's too close. We can't see it. We can't see the abundance, and sometimes we have to blow it. We have to be humbled in order to finally see. I went to the cabin in the mountains because I was discouraged, a little bit tired, and I was questioning my call. Being a pastor isn't easy. Being a parent isn't easy. And God talks to me as a mother or a grandmother, and oftentimes she's in the form of Octavia Spencer. If you saw The Shack, you would know what I'm talking about. She said to me, or what I heard anyway, "Baby, you're good. Keep doing what you're doing. I'm so proud of you. You be you. That's all." And she let me lay my head on her belly, and she stroked my hair. God is in the resurrection business, and God is in the abundance business. God is in the love business. And as Peter was called back to love, so are we. The good work of loving God and loving our neighbor as we learn to love ourselves, it feels too close to be important. Maybe it's too mundane, or it feels too small. It seems too obvious, like our work has to be bigger. It has to be more important than that. And like Paula said last week, it's simple, but it's not easy. Jesus called Peter back to love. Do you love me? You know I do, Lord. Okay, feed my sheep. They need you. And yes, it's not going to be easy. You know I love you, and I'm so proud of you. Feeding lambs and sheep may not be your idea of great success, but I would challenge you as I challenge myself. Feeding lambs and sheep might just be what restores us. Feeding lambs and sheep, those things that are too obvious to be important, this might be what saves the world. The final verse in the book of John says it all. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. This, my friends, this is our Christ who is in the resurrection business, who's in the abundance business, who's in the love business. May we all have eyes to see that which sometimes might seem a little bit too close.
Thanks again for watching today's sermon at Left Hand Church. If you live in Colorado and would like to attend, we meet on Saturdays at 5 o'clock. If you'd like to contribute to Left Hand Church, go to lefthandchurch.org/give. And if you'd like to send us a confidential prayer request, you can send it to prayer@lefthandchurch.org. Thanks again for watching.